Yo, what's good, world? It's your boy Preezy, back at it again with another edition of Creative Insights, where I share my thoughts, views, and experiences on creativity of all fields and genres. Today, I want to speak on 5 tips to mastering your interview skills. Tip number 1 to mastering your interview skills is you have to do the research. You have to search and look under every nook and cranny to find out whatever you need to find out about your subject or whatever you're talking about or whoever you're speaking to set your interview apart. You don't want your interview to come off as every other interview, and I'm going to speak on that later. But you want to do your research, and most of all, you want to know what you're talking about. You want to know who you're talking to. You don't want to go in there blind and have the wrong information. You want to double check, fact check everything that you're asking, because you don't want to come and look unprepared and ask them something that's far from the truth or something that's false, so they know that you haven't done the proper research. Like, I've had different subjects speak to me about other interviews and how my research set me apart. Like, they knew that I took the proper time and I gave them the proper respect to really delve into their backstory, to delve in what they're doing, and so my questions stood apart than the run-of-the-mill cookie-cutter questions. So you definitely want to do your research, and that's tip number 1 to mastering your skills as an interviewer. Tip number 2 to mastering your skills as an interviewer is to study previous interviews. That's, like I said before, you want to set your interviews apart from other interviews. So if you have a subject, you want to check recent interviews that they've done, things in the past, and compare that to what you have as far as questions. You don't want to jack those questions. Better yet, you want to move as far as away from those questions. Yes, there's obvious questions, like for artists. For me, I speak to music artists a lot, so if they're in the middle of a press run, then I may have to ask them questions about the album, the usual questions, but I try to put it in a different way, or but you gotta ask some general questions. But even then, you can still flip it and twist it to make it unique into its own. So you definitely want to study previous interviews to set yourself apart. Make sure you're not treading over previous ground and asking questions that's been asked 100 times, because if your interview's not different from anything else, then why should anybody read it? And that's not even going to keep whoever you're speaking to engaged if you're just asking whatever they used to being asked. It's like, okay, this again, they're going to give you a lazy answer. So you want to keep the subject engaged, and you can do that by first doing your research, and then second, doing your research or strengthening that by studying other interviews so you don't retread ground. So that's definitely the second tip to mastering your skills as an interviewer. You want to study previous interviews and set yourself apart. Tip number 3 to mastering your skills as an interviewer is to allow room for follow-up questions. When you're asking questions, sometimes your subject can veer off of the path, so you want to allow room to maybe, do an audible and build off of something that they said during another question that's unrelated to the next question. So you want to allow room. You want to be able to, like I said, do an audible in the middle of the conversation, and they may have said something interesting and you want to expound more on that topic. So you need to allow room for follow-up questions, and you also need to allow, like I said, the subject, whoever you're talking to, space to say whatever they want to say. They may want to touch on whatever topic is on their mind, and you don't want to cut the subject short because you can get valuable information. There's been so many times where I just let the subject say whatever's on their mind, and I get more than what I originally intended, just because they're passionate about what they're speaking about. You got to catch on to that as an interviewer. So definitely allow room for follow-up questions, and that's a third and important tip to mastering your skills as an interviewer. Tip number 4 to mastering your skills as an interviewer is to properly format your questions. You don't want to just go in with the controversial questions or with the juicy questions. If it's something controversial, you want to put that to the middle or near the end of your interview. You want to warm your subject up. You want to let them know that you're not just looking for juicy headlines. And like I said, with your research and all that beforehand, they'll be comfortable with you because they've established a connection with you to know that you're not just there for that. You know their backstory, you know their history and all of that. You've done the research, so you're doing your job, and it doesn't come off like you're just seeking for juicy, headlines and trying to get controversial quotes. It just looks like you're doing your job and you're doing your due diligence, because they know what the people want to hear and want to know, but sometimes they're not willing to divulge that information just to anybody. So if they respect you and know that you're just doing your job and you're doing it well by asking these questions as a part of what you're doing, then they'll be more open to answering what you have to say. So you just want to know how to format your questions and make it like a story. Like an interview has an arc, it has a beginning, it has a middle where you get deep, and then it has an end where it tails off. So you want to format your questions in that way. You want to know when to ask a certain question, when not to, and just really read the vibe. You know, sometimes you may audible, you may have a certain format, like I said before in the previous tip. You may have to audible, but you do want to try to format your questions to have it like a story arc. So that's tip number 4 to mastering your skills as an interviewer. Tip number 5 to mastering your skills as an interviewer is to establish a connection between the subject and the reader, because you're trying to gather information for the reader. That's who all this is for. You're trying to let the reader know what the subject has going on, how they feel about this, how they feel about that, where they come from, their backstory, and really let them in on who the subject is. And that's what sets apart any great interview. And that's what doing all of those 4 previous tips I mentioned earlier, that's what that does. It establishes a connection. It makes the subject comfortable to divulge any and all information. You know, some things anybody's not going to touch. You know, it's some things people are going to say no comment, but if you establish that connection, they'll be more than willing to really give you the information that you need to make it a great interview. And when you appeal to a subject's interests and you've done your research, you know what makes them tick, you know where they come from, and you want to touch on that and really present who they are beyond what they do, behind who they're with, beyond whatever the subject is about. You want to appeal to who they are as a person, and the subject is going to appreciate that. And not only that, the reader is going to appreciate that, because that's what we all want really when we're reading this. We want to know what something's about, or we want to know what it's rooted in, or who it's about, you know, and the inner workings of all of that. So we want the details. We want what it's really about at its core, whether it's somebody speaking about a product, whether it's somebody speaking about their music or their art, or an entertainer, whatever it is. You want to know the core principles about what it is they're doing and who they are beyond what, you know, the surface is. So that's definitely tip number 5 to mastering your skills as an interviewer. You want to appeal to the subject's interests, and you want to establish that connection between the subject and the reader. Well, those are my 5 tips to mastering an interview. If you have any tips about mastering an interview, conducting an interview, formatting your questions, anything of that sort, feel free to share them in the comments, and I'll feel free to share some of mine with you. And if you enjoyed the content, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel, like and share the video, and click the notification bell so you can receive more inspirational, entertaining, and informative content. But it's your boy Preezy. Peace.